There was no hint of finality in that moment while Tate lay on top of Noah like they had done every night for 22 years. It wasn't distant or detached. It wasn't the behavior of someone already halfway gone. They had fallen asleep like that and intertwined, close, sharing the same space in the same way they always had. There had been no argument that night, no coldness, no sign that this would be the last time. Just the quiet, familiar closeness of two people who had spent years existing side by side. And then sometime before morning something shifted, but only on one side of that bed. When Noah woke up, Tate was gone, not just out of the room, not just out for the morning, but gone in a way that felt final. No explanation is waiting, no words left behind to soften it, just absence, sudden and complete. Talia couldn't reconcile that. Because people who abandon someone, truly abandon them, don't usually spend one last night wrapped around them like that. They don't offer tenderness just before they disappear. They don't act as though nothing has changed, only to vanish hours later as if everything has already ended. There was a contradiction in it that she couldn't resolve, no matter how many times she turned it over in her mind. It would have made more sense if there had been distance leading up to it, if there had been anger or coldness or even indifference. But this felt almost like the opposite, as though Tate had stepped fully into the familiarity one last time before stepping out of it completely. And that was what made it harder to understand. Because it suggested that whatever had driven him to leave hadn't erased what he felt in that moment, or at least, not entirely. There had been something real in that final night, something that didn't align with the clean, emotionless break that followed. Talia was left with two versions of her son who refused to line up. The one who could hold someone gently, instinctively after 22 years of shared life, and the one who could disappear before morning without a word. She didn't know how both could exist at once, but they did. And maybe that was the truth she had been circling all along, that Tate wasn't something she could reduce to a single explanation or pattern. He wasn't just distant or cruel or detached or even loving. He was all of it, layered together in ways that didn't always make sense, even to the people closest to him. A mystery, a contradiction, a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. And slowly, reluctantly, Talia had begun to accept something she never thought she would have to, that she might never understand her son at all. Talia closed that chapter of their lives with a finality that felt both necessary and hollow. The house Tate and Noah had once shared, filled with years of routine, quiet intimacy and unspoken understanding, was renovated and any trace of Tate vanished. Whatever had existed there between Tate and Noah no longer had a physical place to reside. It had been erased, replaced, repurposed into something entirely disconnected from them. One by one, the rest of it disappeared too. The car Tate had bought for Noah was sold off, just another vehicle in circulation, stripped of any meaning it once carried. The clothes Tate had given him over the years, pieces chosen, bought, and worn through different stages of their life, were donated, folded into anonymity, scattered into the lives of strangers. Even the smaller things, the ones that might have seemed insignificant to anyone else, didn't remain. A scarf Noah had once taken from Tate, kept for reasons that probably didn't make sense even to him, was either already returned or set aside to be, as if it too no longer had a place to exist where it was. Everything had been undone. Every tangible piece of Tate's presence in Noah's life had been removed, returned, or released. It wasn't just separation, it was a kind of reversal. As though Noah had gone through each item, each trace, and asked himself the same question: does this still belong to me? And if the answer was no, it was gone. There was something deliberate in it, something thorough. Nothing was left behind that could tether him to what had been. To Talia, it felt like a complete refund of a life once shared. Everything Tate had given, material, visible, concrete, had been given back in some form or another. Nothing lingered. Nothing remained as evidence of the years they had spent intertwined, at least not in any physical sense. It was as if Noah had made sure there was no imbalance, no lingering debt, no unreturned piece of connection that could be pointed to and said, this still belongs to that time. Except, of course, for what couldn't be returned. The tuition Tate had paid, the education Noah had built from it, the degree that now existed as part of who he was. Those things couldn't be handed back or undone. They were permanent, woven into Noah's life in a way that couldn't be separated or erased. And beyond that, there were the memories. Years of them, moments, routines, quiet nights, shared spaces, all of it existing somewhere internal, untouchable, and impossible to give back. Talia knew that when Noah said he didn't think about Tate, that he didn't hold on to him, didn't revisit what they had, it wasn't a lie. Noah meant it. He had let go in the way that mattered for survival. He had moved forward, rebuilt himself in a way that didn't require looking back. There was truth in that detachment, in that decision to no longer center Tate in his thoughts or his life. But Talia also understood something quieter, something less absolute. Because letting go didn't always mean never remembering. Even if Noah didn't dwell on it, even if he didn't allow those memories to shape his present, there were still places in the mind, and deeper than that in the heart, where things didn't fully disappear. Not loudly, not often, but persistently. In moments of stillness, in passing thoughts that surfaced without invitation, in the kind of quiet reflection that came in the darker hours when there was nothing else to focus on. Tullah believed that, whether Noah acknowledged it or not, there were times, rare, brief, but recurring, when Tate crossed his mind. Not with longing, not with desire to return, but simply as a presence that had once been there and couldn't be entirely erased. A thought that appeared and then faded again, leaving no trace except the awareness that it had been there at all. It didn't contradict what Noah had said, it just existed alongside it. Because even when everything else had been returned, removed, or forgotten, there were parts of a life shared that didn't vanish completely. They quieted, they dimmed, they became less frequent, less important, but they didn't disappear. And in those rare, unguarded moments, Tullia suspected that Noah still spared a thought for her son, not out of attachment, not out of regret, but simply because some connections once formed never fully stop echoing, no matter how far away you move from them. Tullah would have given anything, truly anything, for the ability to step inside Tate's mind, even for a moment, and understand what had driven him to abandon Noah. Not just the final decision to leave Noah, but the deeper structure beneath it. How he thought, how he felt, what made something last for decades and then vanish overnight. She wanted clarity, something she could hold on to that would make the chaos of it all feel ordered, explainable. But she knew that kind of understanding wasn't available to her. Tate wasn't the kind of man who explained himself. He didn't unpack his motivations, didn't linger in sentiment, didn't offer insight into the reasons behind his choices. Whatever had led him to walk away from Noah was locked inside him, inaccessible and likely to remain that way. So Tullah did what people do when answers aren't given. She built her own. She chose the explanation that felt the most logical, the one that fit best with everything she had seen over the years, even if it didn't come from Tate himself. In her mind, the only thing that truly accounted for the length and intensity of Tate's attachment to Noah was something deeper than love in the traditional sense. It wasn't that his feelings had been false, but that they hadn't been what they appeared to be either. They hadn't been grounded in something stable, something that could grow and evolve naturally over time. She believed it had been his arrested development. That Tate's emotional world had, in some essential way, stopped progressing when he was young, anchoring him to a bond that began in childhood and never transitioned into something fully adult. His attachment to Noah hadn't endured because it was especially healthy or balanced, but because it had never been forced to change. It had remained fixed in a place where intensity replaced growth, where familiarity replaced evolution. If Tate had matured differently, if he had processed emotions the way most people eventually learn to, Tullah believed the outcome would have been entirely different. She imagined a version of events where before Noah turned 18, before college, before life expanded outward, the two of them would have naturally drifted apart. Maybe in high school, maybe even earlier, not because anything had gone wrong, but because that's what happens when people grow. They change, they separate, they find different paths. In that version, Noah might have had a few meaningful years with Tate, 3 maybe. Enough to matter but not enough to define decades of his life. Instead, Tate's inability to move through his emotions, to outgrow the intensity of that early connection, had stretched something temporary into something long-term. It had given Noah years that felt significant, even foundational. Years that, in Tullah's view, might not have existed if Tate had been able to process attachment in a more typical way. And there was something deeply sad in that realization. Because it meant that what had felt like devotion, like loyalty, like something rare and enduring, might have been rooted in limitation rather than depth. That Noah had experienced all those good years not because the relationship was built on something steady and evolving, but because Tate hadn't known how to let it change, or let it go. Tullia couldn't stop the thoughts from circling in her mind. For years, she had convinced herself that Tate hid behind his emotional immaturity to avoid the consequences of his actions. Every time he disappeared without a word, abandoned Noah, or ran off to see Clay, everyone seemed to find a reason to excuse it. Tullia had begun to wonder if she was the only one who saw how unfair that was. "That's just Tate," people would say. She hated that sentence. It had become the answer to everything. Tate hurt someone? That's just Tate. Tate refused to explain himself. That's just Tate. Tate vanished without warning and expected everyone to accept it when he returned. That's just Tate. No one ever seemed willing to ask whether it was right. If anyone else had treated Noah the way Tate had, they wouldn't still be welcomed into the group. Noah's friends would have cut ties with them. Tate's own friends would have told them their behavior was unacceptable. They would have stopped inviting them around, stopped returning their calls, and eventually ended the relationship altogether. But Tate was different. Everyone bent the rules for him. Instead of expecting him to change, they changed their expectations of him. Instead of holding him accountable, they adjusted their lives around his behavior. They accepted his disappearances, his silence, his emotional distance, and the pain he caused as though it were simply inevitable. Tallulah couldn't understand why. She loved her son more than anyone in the world, but love wasn't supposed to mean pretending harmful behavior didn't exist. She couldn't shake the feeling that everyone around Tate had mistaken explanation for justification. Yes, something had shaped him into the man he had become, but that didn't mean every decision he made was beyond accountability. No, she thought, a difficult past may explain someone's behavior, but it can never excuse the pain they leave behind. If no one is willing to tell Tate when he's wrong, he'll spend the rest of his life believing the world simply has to accept him exactly as he is. Tallulah had spent years asking herself the same question. Why has Tate never wanted a relationship with me? She couldn't remember a time when he had genuinely sought out her company. They could be polite with one another, even friendly on occasion, but there was always an invisible wall between them. The one time he had broken down and cried on her shoulder had felt so out of character that she still wondered what had driven him to it. It was one of the only moments she had ever felt like his mother. Then the wall had gone back up. More often than not, Tate treated her with open contempt. More than once he had called her a bitch in front of other people, never seeming embarrassed or remorseful afterward. The words stung every time, not only because they were cruel but because she could never understand where they came from. She had long since accepted that whatever resentment Tate carried toward her, it ran far deeper than she understood. Now, after everything that had happened with Noah over the past week, she couldn't help but feel something had finally broken beyond repair. Their relationship had already been fragile, but watching Tate's treatment of Noah had changed something inside her. She couldn't reconcile the son she loved with the pain he had inflicted on someone who had cared so deeply for him. The hardest part was knowing Tate. He probably wouldn't even realize the damage he had done, and if he did notice, she doubted he would feel compelled to fix it. Repairing relationships had never seemed important to him once he believed they were over. She could almost hear the conversation playing out in her head. If she confronted him, if she told him how deeply he'd hurt Noah or how disappointed she was in the way he'd handled everything, Tate would probably roll his eyes. He would act as though she were creating unnecessary drama over something he considered finished. "Get over it," she imagined him saying with that dismissive tone that always cut deeper than shouting ever could. "It's not like we were married." The thought made her heart ache. Was that really how little he valued people once he believed a relationship had ended? Or was it simply easier for him to pretend nothing mattered than to admit he'd hurt someone? She didn't know anymore. All she knew was that somewhere along the way, she had lost her son long before she realized he was gone. For the first time in her life, Tallulah was forced to admit something she never imagined she would think about her own child. She didn't like her son. She loved him, she always would, nothing could change that. But she no longer liked the man he had become. She didn't like the way he treated people. She didn't like how casually he discarded their feelings, how easily he walked away from relationships without explanation, or how he expected everyone else to absorb the emotional consequences of his decisions. Most of all, she didn't like what he had done to Noah. The painful truth was that none of it was new. Tate had been this way for as long as she could remember. Even as a little boy in preschool, he had carried himself as though the rules applied to everyone else but him. If another child cried because of something he had done, he rarely seemed interested in their feelings. He expected the world to adjust to him rather than the other way around. As he grew older, that attitude only became more entrenched. Sometimes, Tallulah wondered if Tate genuinely believed he was above everyone else. He had grown up with wealth, privilege, and influence, and too often people had made allowances for him simply because he was Tate Blah. Doors opened for him, mistakes were forgiven. Consequences seemed to disappear before they ever reached him. Somewhere along the way, people had stopped expecting accountability from him. And she had to admit that she had been part of the problem. She had defended him, rationalized his behavior, told herself he was complicated, misunderstood, or simply struggling. Every excuse she made had allowed him to avoid facing the impact of his choices. She was finished doing that. Until Tate could look Noah in the eye, admit that what he had done was wrong, accept responsibility without blaming anyone else, and genuinely try to repair the damage he had caused. She didn't want to be around him. It wasn't punishment. It was a boundary. She refused to keep pretending that love meant accepting behavior she knew was wrong. Tallulah didn't take comfort in that conclusion. It didn't make the outcome easier to accept. If anything, it made it heavier, because it reframed everything that had come before, casting it in a light that felt less certain, less secure than it once had. Still, she held on to it, not because it was perfect, but because it was the only explanation that didn't fall apart when she examined it closely. It accounted for the duration, the intensity, and the abrupt ending in a way nothing else had, and even as she settled on that understanding, she knew she was moving on. Not in the sense of forgetting, she wouldn't forget any of it, but in the sense of no longer searching for answers she would never receive. She had reached the edge of what she could understand, and beyond that was only speculation. She would still see Tate. He was still her son, and that connection didn't disappear no matter how complicated things became, but something between them had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. There was distance now, not just physical but emotional, something quieter, heavier. Because Talia couldn't reconcile the person Tate was to her with the way he had treated Noah. She couldn't feel close to someone who had been capable of that kind of detachment, that kind of finality, towards someone she had come to see almost as another son. The bond she had once felt with Tate hadn't broken entirely, but it had thinned, altered by a loss of trust she didn't know how to rebuild. And so she carried both things at once, the love she had for her son, and the quiet, enduring distance that came from knowing what he had done. Noah had moved on, at least that was what it looked like from the outside. After the breaking point with Tate, there had been a period of quiet unraveling that only a few people ever really saw. He had grieved in his own way, even if it didn't look like the kind of grief people expected. There were no dramatic displays, no drawn-out mourning in public spaces. But there had been mornings, heavy, disoriented mornings, where he leaned on Susie, where the weight of it all pressed down just enough to surface before he pushed it back again. There had been tears, brief and contained, the kind that came and went without announcement. And then, just as quietly, he had started to rebuild. The place that had held years of routine, of familiarity, of connection, was no longer the same. From the outside, he seemed to be doing well. He went out, he reconnected. He started dating casually at first, then with a little more openness. There were different faces, different conversations, different possibilities. He wasn't hiding anymore, not from the people who mattered. He was out to everyone, his friends, his circle, even to Terrence, who had come to occupy a kind of surrogate father role in his life. That in itself marked a shift. There was a kind of honesty there now, a willingness to exist as himself without filtering or concealing parts of who he was. But beneath all of that, there was still something else. Numbness, not the absence of function. He was functioning, moving forward, doing all the things people associate with healing, but the absence of feeling in its fullest sense. It was as though he had dulled something inside himself, intentionally or not, just enough to keep going without being pulled back into what he had lost. The sharp edges of grief had been blunted, but they hadn't necessarily disappeared. They had just been pushed somewhere quieter. And when it came to Tate, Noah had made a decision that was as firm as it was telling. All of Noah's friends, Susie, Andrew, Jack, Bree, Mark, and Anna, had listened to Talia's explanation and for the most part accepted it. It made sense. It followed a pattern they had all witnessed in different ways at different times. It aligned with Tate's past behavior, with the intensity of his attachments, with the way he seemed to idealize and then abruptly detach. It even fit on the surface with what they understood about his emotional struggles and diagnosis. There was a kind of relief in having an answer that felt coherent, something they could point to and say, this is why it happened. It didn't fix anything, of course. It didn't undo what had been done to Noah or make the years any less complicated. But it gave shape to something that had felt chaotic. It made Tate's actions feel less random, less incomprehensible. And for most of them, that was enough. Except for Andrew. Andrew had listened just like the others, quiet, attentive, his expression unreadable in the way it often was when he was thinking more than he was reacting. But when the conversation settled, when everyone else seemed to land on agreement, he didn't follow them there. He didn't argue outright, didn't challenge Talia directly, but there was a subtle shift in him that made it clear he wasn't convinced. At one point, Andrew had simply smiled to himself, the kind of small, private smile that didn't invite questions. He turned a page of his newspaper, as if the conversation had already moved on for him, and muttered something under his breath, just barely audible, about Tate being a very interesting, complex man. That very few people ever truly understood someone like him. That complexity didn't always fit into explanations that felt neat or satisfying. He didn't elaborate, and that more than anything stood out. Because Andrew was a psychologist. If anyone in the room had the tools to break down behavior, to analyze patterns, to either support or dismantle Talia's theory in a clear and structured way, it was him. But he chose not to. He didn't correct them. He didn't offer an alternative. He just withheld agreement. It left an impression, not because he was dismissive, he wasn't, but because he seemed to see something the others didn't, and had decided, for reasons of his own, not to fully share it. Maybe he understood that explanations like Talia's, even if incomplete, served a purpose. Maybe he knew that introducing more uncertainty wouldn't help anyone move forward. Or maybe he simply believed that Tate's motivations weren't something that could be reduced to a single theory, no matter how logical it seemed. Whatever the reason, Andrew kept it to himself. And that quiet disagreement lingered in the background, unspoken but present. A reminder that even the most convincing explanation wasn't necessarily the whole truth, and that Tate, for all the patterns they thought they recognized, might still be more complicated than any of them were willing or able to fully understand. Talia had shared her thoughts carefully with Noah, choosing her words with more restraint than she usually allowed herself. She didn't present them as the absolute truth, didn't insist that she had finally solved the mystery of Tate. Instead, she offered what she had come to believe, her reasoning, shaped by years of observation, by patterns she couldn't ignore, by the need to make sense of something that refused to explain itself. She told Noah that, in her view, it wasn't about pressure or disappointment or boredom. It was something deeper, something rooted in the way Tate had developed or failed to. She explained her belief that Tate's attachment had lasted so long not because it was stable or healthy, but because it had never truly evolved. That what they had shared had been stretched far beyond what it might have been under different circumstances. But she didn't push it onto him. She didn't need Noah to agree with her, didn't need him to adopt her interpretation as his own. She understood that whatever explanation Noah carried would be shaped by his own experience, his own perspective, his own way of processing what had happened. And in some ways, his version of events mattered more than hers ever could. So she left space for that. She told him what she thought, and then she let it rest there, open, unfinished, available but not imposed. If Noah believed it, then it might offer him some kind of framework, some way to understand the years he had spent with Tate. And if he didn't, if he found his own explanation or chose not to search for one at all, that was just as valid. Talia had reached her own conclusion because she needed one, but she didn't expect Noah to need the same. Noah did what he always did best. He assumed the worst and prepared to never know or gain closure because Tate would rather die than tell him the truth. He believed Tate had kept him around because he was lonely. After all, he needed somebody in bed, and since Noah liked him and tolerated everything, he allowed their connection, this strange, unnameable relationship, to persist far longer than it should have. Long enough that it bordered on obscene, given the depth of intimacy and emotional connection between them. He didn't know any platonic guy friends who slept in the same twin bed, holding hands even at 26. He was surprised in retrospect that nothing during those years had broken them up, but he also wondered if it had been codependency, Tate's inability to emotionally mature, or simply that Tate's emotional capacity was that of a teenager. Noah had no idea how to help Tate, and maybe he never could. Tate had made it very clear he wanted nothing to do with him, and Noah was going to respect that. There was nothing to gain by reaching out to someone who thought of him as nothing more than a note on the fridge. Have a good life. It still hurt. A week later, he would never forgive Tate for leaving without a face-to-face goodbye. No hug, no thank you. Just an absence and a message that said more in its brevity than any words ever could. He had given Tate years of loyalty, of dedication, of presence, and what did he have in return? Memories and a complicated, undefinable bond with someone who had shown no inkling of valuing him beyond the comfort of his constancy. Noah felt pity for the woman Tate was with now. Tate was not capable of loving anyone nor accepting any love from others. He remembered the highway when Tate had broken down in tears after the Wayne incident, one of the only times Noah had ever seen him show real emotion. And even then it had been clear, Tate was incapable of love. Whatever connection they had shared was not romantic, not friendship, not even something worth nomming or important enough to say goodbye in person, giving Noah closure. And the behavior Tate showed at the end, cold, distant, and uncompromising, proved how little he had ever thought of Noah. Only Wayne could unearth real emotions from Tate, something Noah couldn't do. Noah was jealous of someone he didn't know personally. Maybe Tate loved Wayne or Tate fucked him. What was even more heartbreaking for Noah was the realization that Tate had never truly seen Noah. Tate had seen Noah as a warm body, a playmate, a budwama, someone to have fun with, but not as a person worthy of a proper goodbye, not even someone to wish well in person. Noah thought back to all the memories, the laughter, the quiet moments they had shared over the years, companionship. He had been so sure it had been a loving relationship, but also what Talia had called brotherhood. And yet, in all that time, there had been no suggestion that Tate saw him as more than a convenient bed warmer or someone to curl around at night to stay warm. Tate had treated him like a caregiver, a body to snuggle against, or someone who asked for nothing, who gave endlessly and expected nothing in return. Tate had breadcrumbed him for years, giving just enough affection to keep him close. And no one knew, perhaps not even Noah at the time, that Tate walking away from the Rambler might have been the best thing he ever did. Because now, with Tate gone, Noah could finally step into the world on his own terms, start dating, maybe get married, have a family. Or, if he wanted to follow his heart, he could find someone who truly valued him, someone with whom he could build a real life, something tangible, something lasting, before he turned 35 in a few years. Tate would probably marry Clay. Poor Clay had no idea what type of emotionless man she was dating. They would have no children but a happy life nonetheless. And whatever emotional intimacy Noah and Tate had shared would become just that, memories, filed away and remembered but no longer alive in the present. Because if Tate had truly loved Noah, he would never have left him feeling abandoned. He would never have made him feel unloved, unnecessary, or invisible. On June 7th, Mark had invited Noah on a 3-day gay cruise, something loud, social, full of energy and distraction, but Noah had declined without much hesitation. He wasn't in the mood for crowds or celebration, not in that way. The idea of forcing himself into that kind of environment felt wrong, like skipping ahead emotionally before he had actually caught up with where he was. Still, he hadn't dismissed Mark entirely. He told him to take his work bag for the trip, a small, practical gesture that kept things easy between them. Before Mark left on the cruise, the apartment felt still. Noah took the time to clean out the bag more out of habit than anything else. He moved through it methodically, receipts, loose papers, things that had been forgotten and carried around without purpose. And then, tucked between compartments where it didn't belong, he found it. The green envelope. He recognized it immediately, even before his mind fully caught up with what he was seeing. There was something unmistakable about it, not just the color but the weight of it, the implication of it. It didn't take long for him to piece it together. Tullah must have slipped it into his bag yesterday at the restaurant when he had gotten up to pay the bill. It was the only moment she would have had, the only time his attention had been elsewhere. Noah wasn't angry. If anything, he understood it. Tullah had been trying in her own way to do what she thought was right. She didn't want him to move forward without all the information, without whatever final words Tate might have left behind. Maybe she believed it would give him closure. Maybe she thought it would answer questions he hadn't asked out loud. Or maybe she simply couldn't bear the idea that something so significant had been left unread, unopened, unknown. And if there was even a chance that it could bring Noah some kind of comfort, however small, then to her, it had been worth slipping it into the bag. Now it was in his hands. Noah sat with it for a long time. He didn't open it, not at first. He just looked at it, turning it over slowly as if examining it might somehow reveal its contents without forcing him to confront them directly. The handwriting on the front, Tate's handwriting, was enough to make something tighten in his chest. Familiar, immediate, impossible to ignore. Time passed without him noticing. Minutes stretched into something longer, an hour, then more. The envelope remained unopened, resting in his hands or on the table in front of him, never far from reach but never quite crossed into action. It wasn't indecision, it was fear, because whatever was inside that envelope couldn't be taken back. If Tate had written something cruel, something sharp, something dismissive, something that reinforced the way everything had ended, Noah knew it would stay with him. Words had a way of doing that. They lingered, replayed themselves, embedded in memory in ways that actions sometimes didn't. And Tate, when he chose to be cutting, knew exactly how to make words land. Noah was terrified of that, terrified that opening the envelope would replace the silence he had learned to live with, something worse, something permanent, that whatever fragile distance he had built between himself and Tate would collapse under the weight of a few sentences, that he would read something he couldn't unsee, couldn't forget, couldn't move past. So he waited. He sat there for over 2 hours, the envelope in front of him, his mind circling every possibility, every version of what Tate might have written. Some were softer, unlikely, but still present. Others were harsher, more in line with the way things had ended. All of them felt real, and the longer he waited, the heavier the decision became. Noah opened the green envelope Tate had given me through his mother, Tullah. His fingers trembled because he was terrified of what he might find, expecting something worse than the note on the fridge a year ago. But what I imagined couldn't have prepared me for the reality. In my hands was a wedding announcement. Tate had proposed to Clay, and somehow he still wanted me to be there on June 12 to watch him marry her. He was marrying Chloe only 10 days after leaving the Rambler. 10 days. It was as though he needed no time to grieve, no time to recover, no period of mourning before replacing the life we had shared. 10 days was all it took for Tate to walk away from 22 years of intimacy between two boys who had grown up loving each other. At least I knew I had loved him. To Tate, it seemed as though everything we had been together could be folded away, packed into a box, and forgotten in less than 2 weeks. Every memory, every shared night, every promise left unspoken, every moment that had made me believe I mattered to him had been erased with breathtaking ease. And yet, after all of that, he still expected me to sit in the church and watch him pledge his life to someone else, as if witnessing the end of us was a privilege instead of a cruelty. My entire family and circle of friends would probably assume I was hurt because I was in love with Tate or because I had been at some point in the past. But that wasn't true. All Tate had to do was wait for me to wake up on June 2, or tell me the night before face to face. He could have said, "No, I'm unhappy. I've fallen in love with Clay and I want the chance to build a traditional life with her. I still love you and I still want you in my life. I don't want you to feel like you're being replaced because that's not what this is. You'll always be important to me. I'll probably be gone for a few weeks after the wedding, but when I come back I want to make sure we stay close. I want to continue prioritizing our friendship, whatever you want to call the relationship we've shared all these years. I'm not leaving because I'm tired of you or because you stopped mattering. I simply fell in love with someone else. Thank you for letting me share my life with you for all these years. I still want you to be part of it." That was all Tate had to do. Instead, he walked away without a conversation, without an explanation, and without giving me the bare minimum of respect. He didn't give me the chance to ask questions, say goodbye, or find any sense of closure. After everything we had shared over 22 years. He left as though I wasn't even owed an honest conversation. That was what hurt me, not that he chose Chloe but that he chose silence. I read the announcement over and over. It was like a nightmare, the absolute worst nightmare I could imagine. There was nothing I could do to stop it. Even if I confessed everything, my feelings, my longing, my years of devotion, it wouldn't change a thing. Tate wasn't gay. He had never been. I'd never seen him show interest in anyone but women. Even if he knew how I felt, it wouldn't matter. He was set on his life, his choices, his path. The only way anything could have changed would have been for him to completely rewire his brain, his personality, his desires, everything about him. Only then could he have responded to any of my feelings, but that would never happen. And so I sat there holding the envelope, realizing that the world I had imagined, one where Tate could somehow love me back, was just that, imagined, gone forever. I stared at photos and frames of Tate and my memories of us as kids and adults. I noticed for the first time that the photos were only of the two and never included his family or parents. A particular white frame containing a photo Talia snapped of Tate and me on my 18th birthday was gone. Missing, perhaps mislaid. I hadn't noticed before today. Tate was happy in the photos, unquestionably happy, perhaps overjoyed whenever his arms or body were next to mine. I didn't understand how a guy who used my body for decades could also touch me while laughing and be that happy. I read the announcement, and tears fell from my eyes because I knew there was no going back to what we were. I don't even give a fuck what we ever were. Maybe that was the inside joke that made teenage Tate laugh so much whenever I mentioned teachers, students, or parents talking and trying to label what our bond was. Tate always laughed and never explained why he said that everyone were fools and that it was more fun teasing them than telling them. You are cordially invited to join us for the wedding rehearsal, the wedding ceremony, the post-wedding festivities, and the send-off celebration at the groom's family residence, as we honor and celebrate the joining of two devoted hearts in the sacred bond of holy matrimony. Chloe Elizabeth Celia Montgomery and Tatum Joseph Cornelius Blue joyfully invite you to witness the beginning of their new life together as they unite in marriage, celebrating a love that has touched and inspired the hearts of all who know them. Mr. and Mrs. William J. Montgomery of Beverly Hills and Mr. and Mrs. Terrence Blue of Los Angeles are pleased to announce the engagement of their children, Chloe Elizabeth Celia Montgomery and Tatum Joseph Cornelius Blue. The couple will be married on Saturday, June 12, 1994 at St. Mary's Church at 3 in the afternoon, followed by a reception at the Blue family estate in Los Angeles. Chloe Montgomery is a graduate of UCLA and enjoys hosting art exhibits while managing charity events. Tate Blue is a graduate of Brown University and is the heir of his family's conglomerate empire. The couple will reside in Los Angeles in a new Beverly Hills mansion following the ceremony. Kindly RSVP at your earliest convenience and indicate whether you will be attending, and if you wish to bring a guest to share in this momentous celebration of the union of two families who are deeply respected within the community. Should you wish to honor the couple with a wedding gift, we kindly ask that you register your gift by contacting the bride's immediate family. Attire: black tie. Gentlemen are requested to wear tuxedos or formal evening attire, and ladies are invited to wear floor-length ballroom gowns or elegant formal evening dresses. I sat alone in the quiet of my new home, the weight of 30 years pressing on me like a stone. To everyone, including Tate, the one person I had loved more than myself, I had always been invisible, a boy who felt too much and was never seen. Queer, alone, and unclaimed by the world I had tried to give my heart to, I carried the ache of devotion that had never been returned, the intimacy that had meant everything yet counted for nothing. Noah turned the thought over in his mind, and the more he did, the less it felt like a coincidence. Why that date? Why would Tate make his mother promise to deliver something as personal and final as a wedding announcement at the same time as adoption papers, as if both moments belonged together, as if both were meant to land at once? It felt deliberate, too deliberate. Tate wasn't careless with timing, not when it came to things that carried meaning. A few minutes later, I realized why Tate had chosen to announce his wedding at the same time as the adoption. He wanted the engagement to overshadow what should have been an important family moment. Like Joey, Tate seemed to have a habit of making every significant occasion about himself. Whether it was a public announcement, a letter, or even a postcard, he always found a way to shift the attention away from the event everyone had gathered to celebrate and back onto his own life. Instead of allowing the focus to remain on my becoming a member of Tate's family, he made the day about himself, his fiancée, and his upcoming wedding. He couldn't even let me experience a small moment of happiness. Even though I wasn't planning to sign the adoption papers, the occasion still represented something meaningful, and somehow Tate found a way to eclipse it. It seemed as though he couldn't bear not being the center of attention. As I stood there, I remembered something Madison, one of the cheerleaders from high school, had once said after watching Tate interact with people. She had called him a textbook narcissist. At the time, I dismissed her comment. Now, watching him redirect an entire family's attention toward himself on a day that should have been about something else, I couldn't help wondering if she had understood him better than I ever did. June 12th. Tate would be getting married, moving forward, starting a new life publicly, definitively, in a way that left no room for interpretation. It felt like an answer without words, or maybe a message, and if that wasn't enough, there was something else layered beneath it, something older, something that made the date feel even heavier. June 12th had also been the day 1 year ago when Joey died, back in 1993, another ending, another loss tied to that same point in time. The pattern was hard to ignore, 3 moments all converging on the same date. The day Joey died, the day Tate would marry Chloe, the day Tate chose to become a married man. Noah sat with that, trying to make sense of it, trying to decide if it meant something, or if he was the one assigning meaning, because the alternative felt too empty. Because if it was intentional, then what was Tate saying? Was it a way of closing something? Of replacing one life with another, marking the transition as cleanly and sharply as possible? Was it a way of reclaiming a date that had once held loss and turning it into something else, something that belonged entirely to Tate now? Or was it something colder, a kind of final statement, a way of making sure Noah would never forget not just the ending but the exact moment of it? As if Tate had taken that day and carved it deeper into both of their lives, attaching new meaning to it while erasing the old. Noah didn't know which interpretation was worse, because either way it didn't feel accidental. Tate had always had a way of making things precise when he wanted to, of choosing moments, gestures, timing, things that seemed small on the surface but carried weight underneath. And this felt like one of those choices. It made the envelope in his hands feel heavier, because whatever was inside it, whatever Tate had decided to say or not say, was tied to all of this, to that date, to that pattern, to a decision that felt both deeply personal and completely unreachable at the same time. And Noah was left with the same question he had been asking from the beginning, not just what Tate had done, but why. I called Mark and told him that Chernobyl had happened, and that the love of my life was marrying a generic straight blonde rich socialite. Mark offered again to take me on a gay cruise to take my mind off of everything, and I agreed. I would be back just in time for the wedding. We laughed about how life sometimes takes us on crazy routes or unexpected detours, and once I hung up, I realized that whatever closeness, love, brotherhood, or relationship Tate and I had was done, gone, and buried. I turned on my radio and listened to my favorite song, Small Town Boy, as I danced. The carefree and stressful hours of my previous years fell away. I was going to go on a nice cruise free of charge with the only gay friend I knew or had spent time with. We would bond together and enjoy life before I had to return to a family and an ex-love that I didn't care enough to ever explain why I was done. Tate probably wouldn't care, and I was going to show him as much civility and kindness as he has shown me. None. I was done. I was so done with Tate. I was done with everything. I would still keep in touch with his parents, especially Tulia, but I was done with Tate. If we happened to run into each other at a restaurant or at a family gathering or even at a wedding, that wouldn't be fine, but I wouldn't seek him out and I would try and avoid him as best as possible without him ever knowing I was avoiding him. After 22 years of loving, waiting, and hopping, I was still invisible to everyone, especially Tate, the one straight boy I had always loved. Good luck, babes, Chapel Roan. That's fine, it's cool. You can say that we are nothing, but you know the truth and guess I'm the fool. With her arms out like an angel through the car sunroof. I don't want to call it off, but you don't want to call it love. You only want to be the one that I call baby. You can kiss 100 boys in bars. Shoot another shot, try to stop the feeling. You can say it's just the way you are. Make a new excuse, another stupid reason. Good luck, babe, well, good luck. Well, good luck, babe, well, good luck. You'd have to stop the world just to stop the feeling. Good luck, babe, well, good luck. Well, good luck, babe, well, good luck. You'd have to stop the world just to stop the feeling. I'm Klusha, who cares? It's a sexually explicit kind of love affair. And I cry, it's not fair. I just need a little lovin', I just need a little air. I think I'm gonna call it off even if you call it love. I just wanna love someone who calls me baby. You can kiss 100 boys in bars. Shoot another shot, try to stop the feeling. You can say it's just the way you are. Make a new excuse, another stupid reason. Good luck, babe, well, good luck. Well, good luck, babe, well, good luck. You'd have to stop the world just to stop the feeling. Good luck, babe, well, good luck. Well, good luck, babe, well, good luck. You'd have to stop the world just to stop the feeling. Hooku, yeah, ooh. And when you wake up next to him in the middle of the night, with your head in your hands, you're nothing more than his wife. And when you think about me all of those years ago, you're standing face to face with, I told you so. You know I hate to say it, I told you so. You know I hate to say, but I told you so. You can kiss 100 boys in bars. Shoot another shot, try to stop the feeling, well, I told you so. You can say it's just the way you are. Make a new excuse, another stupid reason. Good luck, babe, well, good luck. Well, good luck, babe, well, good luck. You'd have to stop the world just to stop the feeling. Good luck, babe, well, good luck. Well, good luck, babe, well, good luck. You'd have to stop the world just to stop the feeling. You'd have to stop the world just to stop the feeling. You'd have to stop the world just to stop the feeling. You'd have to stop the world just to stop the feeling. I spent 3 days on a gay cruise in Mexico with my best friend Mark, a bisexual man who had never been particularly subtle about the way he felt about me. He carried it lightly, though never pushing, never making things uncomfortable. There was something quietly loyal in the way he cared, something that made it easy to accept without feeling cornered. Even when I didn't return those feelings, he stayed exactly what I needed, steady, warm, and present. Whether we were back in Los Angeles or drifting somewhere between ports, Mark had this way of making sure I was okay without making a show of it. It was the kind of care you don't question, you just rely on it. The cruise itself felt like a suspended world, separate from everything I had left behind. Days blurred into nights filled with laughter, music, and strangers who didn't know my history and didn't expect anything from me. We met people from everywhere, men with stories that spilled easily over drinks, fleeting connections that burned bright for a night and softened into memory by morning. There was a freedom in that, in being someone unburdened by the weight of home. It reminded me of the time immediately after I graduated from Brown when I had first started traveling, chasing that same feeling of movement and escape that I had before my mom died. Back then, every new place had felt like a way to outrun grief. This time, it wasn't about running, it was about breathing. Mark and I fell into an easy rhythm. We'd spend afternoons stretched out under the sun, talking about nothing and everything, watching the ocean roll endlessly around us. At night we'd disappear into the pulse of the ship, dancing, flirting, letting ourselves exist in a space where nothing had to be permanent. Mark was always nearby, sometimes just a glance away in a crowded room, sometimes closer, his hand brushing mine in a way that felt intentional but never demanding. There were moments when I wondered what it would be like to lean into that, to let something simple grow out of something already safe. But the thought always passed, replaced by the comfort of knowing he wouldn't disappear just because I didn't. What made it different this time, what made it easier, was knowing what waited for me back home had changed. Or at least it felt like it had. The last time I'd left, I'd carried a tightness in my chest the entire trip, a constant anticipation of returning to tension, to anger I couldn't control. There had always been that presence looming over everything, a jealous, hazel-eyed bedfellow who blurred the lines between affection and possession, whose volatility turned even small things into something unpredictable. Tate Blow wouldn't be waiting at home for me this time in his backyard at his mom's house, shooting thousands of rounds of bullets this time, because I dared to go on a trip with his most hated rival without his permission or blessing. This time I would return home to see my friends and my surrogate parents, and not spare an iota of thought on my ex-jealous bedfellow who had abandoned me but later invited me to his wedding, of all things. I used to brace myself before going back, as if stepping into a storm I couldn't avoid. But out on the water, with nothing but distance between me and that life, I could finally feel the absence of that fear. I wasn't checking my phone every hour. I wasn't rehearsing explanations in my head. I wasn't imagining the sound of raised voices or the sharp crack of something breaking the quiet. For the first time in a long time, returning home didn't feel like something I had to survive. It felt neutral. Uncertain maybe, but not suffocating. And in that space between who I had been and who I might become, I let myself exist without choosing anything yet. Mark had chosen Mexico as the destination for the cruise, and from the moment he told me, something in me lit up. I'd never been, but I'd always imagined it: sun-bleached coastlines, cities that felt alive in a different rhythm, a place far enough away to feel like a clean break from everything I knew. It turned out to be exactly that. The air felt different there, lighter somehow, and every port carried its own kind of wonder. We wandered through unfamiliar streets, tasted food that lingered long after the plates were cleared, and fell into conversations with people who seemed to exist without the same guardedness I'd grown used to. The ship itself became its own small world. There was music almost constantly, laughter echoing down corridors late into the night, and a kind of openness that made everything feel possible, even if only temporarily. The company was easy, men who weren't afraid to want to say it, to act on it. It was something I hadn't realized I'd been missing until I was surrounded by it. Desire, when it was mutual, didn't feel like something fragile or one-sided. It wasn't something you had to carry quietly, hoping it wouldn't be rejected. It met you halfway, it answered back. That was the part that stayed with me the most. Not just the places or the experiences, but the realization of how different it felt when something was shared. I'd spent so long wrapped up in feelings that had nowhere to land that I'd started to believe that was just how it worked for me. With Tate, it had never been mutual, never even close. What I felt for him had lived entirely in my own head, growing into something bigger than it ever had a chance to be in reality. I had built entire versions of us out of nothing but hope and silence, convincing myself that if I just held on to it long enough, it might turn into something real. But it never did. It never even tried to. Out there, with the ocean stretching endlessly around us and new faces every day, I could finally see it for what it was. Not some tragic, unfinished love story, but a crush. A quiet, consuming one, sure, but still just that. A fantasy I had protected, polished, and hidden away because it felt safer than risking the truth. I had never dared to test it, never stepped far enough forward to let it either become something or fall apart completely. I'd kept it suspended, untouched by reality, where it could stay perfect and painful all at once. Maybe that was the point. Maybe I hadn't been ready for anything real back then. Or maybe I had just been too afraid of losing him entirely if I reached for more. Either way, standing there in a place I'd once only imagined, surrounded by people who didn't hesitate to want and be wanted in return, I could feel something shifting. Not all at once, not dramatically, but enough to know that whatever I had been holding onto for years didn't have to define what came next. We returned to Los Angeles on June 10th at noon, the sun sitting high in the sky like it had been waiting for us. The light felt different here, warmer, steadier, less forgiving than the soft, endless blue we had left behind at sea. Stepping out onto dry land again brought a quiet kind of relief, the kind that settled deep in your bones. No rocking beneath my feet, no horizon stretching too far to grasp, just solid ground, familiar air, and the subtle hum of a city I had always called home. It was nice to be back, not just in Los Angeles but near everything that made me feel rooted: friends, memories, the streets that had watched me grow into someone I barely recognized now. There was comfort in that, even if it came with a sharp edge of nostalgia. I loved where I grew up, I always had. Even when I tried to leave pieces of it behind, it had a way of finding me again, pulling me back, and like it knew I was never really gone. The taxi ride was quiet, the driver uninterested in conversation, which I didn't mind. It gave me space to watch the city unfold outside the window. Palm trees drifted past in slow rhythm, their shadows stretching across sidewalks and rooftops. Familiar neighborhoods blurred together, each corner holding some fragment of my past. It felt like revisiting an old life, when I had lived so fully that it still lingered in the air. When we turned onto the street, I felt it immediately, that shift in my chest, like something tightening without warning. The blue mansion came into view. It was still there, beautiful in that striking, almost intimidating way. Ornate details lined every edge of it, from the carved stone to the tall windows that reflected the bright afternoon light. Time hadn't taken anything from it. If anything, it seemed even more solid, more permanent than I remembered. Like it had been standing there not just for years, but for lifetimes, quietly watching everything change around it. Home. The word came naturally, even after everything. I hadn't lived there in 3 years, not since Tate had bought me the Rambler, the small green home tucked away from all of this. That place had been softer, quieter, a retreat from the intensity that seemed to live within these walls. It had been a gift, but also a turning point. Leaving the mansion had meant leaving behind a version of myself I wasn't sure I could ever return to. And yet here I was. The taxi rolled to a stop, the tires crunching softly against the driveway. For a moment, neither of us moved. The engine idled, then cut, and suddenly the silence felt too loud. I reached for my suitcase, stepping out into the heat as it wrapped around me, instantly familiar and unrelenting. We began walking up the driveway, the sound of our luggage wheels trailing behind us in uneven rhythm. Each step felt heavier than it should have, as if the ground itself was resisting us or perhaps warning us. The closer we got, the more something shifted in the air. It felt eerie, not just quiet, but wrong in a way I couldn't immediately explain, like stepping into a memory instead of the present, like something unfinished was waiting for us. And then it hit me, the feeling wasn't new. It was the same as before during our return from the cruise in 1990. The realization settled in slowly, then all at once. My chest tightened as the past rose around me, vivid and unavoidable. I could almost see it, the way things had looked, the tension that had clung to everything back then, the sense that something was about to happen even if no one said it out loud. For a brief, irrational moment I expected it again. Gunshots, the sharp, echoing crack that didn't belong but somehow had. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, a flicker of tension running through me, as if history might repeat itself simply because we had stepped back into the same place. But the silence held, no sound came, only memory. And then, just as clearly, I could hear her voice. Talia, the moment 4 years ago when she welcomed us home, while her words were drowned out by petty gunshots. Loud, sharp, unmistakable, cutting through everything like she always had. I almost laughed, remembering how my surrogate mother stopped talking to us in the living room, then stomped over to a side window, pushing it open and letting out the frustration she had been trying to control all summer. Totem Joseph Cornelius Blue, will you hush up, we're trying to eat in here. It played in my head so vividly I almost looked up, half expecting to see her leaning out of one of those tall windows, her expression equal parts irritated and amused. I could picture it perfectly, the movement of the curtain, the way her voice carried across the driveway, the life that seemed to pour out of the house when she was there. Back then, it had been chaotic, loud, alive. Now, nothing. The windows stayed still, the curtains didn't move, no voice followed the echo in my mind. Just the faint sound of the wind brushing against the edges of the house, as if even it didn't want to disturb the quiet. We kept walking, slower now, as though instinctively trying not to break whatever fragile stillness surrounded us. The mansion loomed closer with every step, its presence heavier than before. It didn't just feel like a house, it felt like a place filled with everything we had ever been, every moment layered on top of the next. I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle, the weight grounding me as the past pressed in from all sides. 3 years since my move out of this property, but 4 from when those loud gunshots shook this home, and yet nothing about this felt distant. If anything, it felt closer, sharper, like the house had been waiting. We reached the front of the mansion, the steps rising before us, unchanged and familiar. I paused without meaning to, my eyes tracing the details I had once known without thinking. The door stood closed, quiet and still, holding everything behind it like a secret. For a moment I didn't move, because standing there, caught between memory and reality, it felt like stepping forward wouldn't just bring me inside, it would bring everything back. I texted Talia the moment we pulled into the driveway, my fingers moving almost automatically, like muscle memory had taken over. We're here. Simple. No build-up, no warning, just enough to let her know the past had officially caught up with the present. We hadn't even reached the porch before the front door flew open with a sharp, familiar force, slamming lightly against the stopper as if the house itself had exhaled. The sudden noise broke through the stillness, and for the first time since we arrived, the place felt alive again. Talia, I barely had time to say her name. She came rushing out fast and unrestrained, exactly the way I remembered. There was nothing cautious about her, nothing measured, just pure, unfiltered presence. In a second she was in front of me, arms wrapping around me tightly like she was making up for every moment I had been gone. The hug hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just a greeting, it was recognition, confirmation, something solid and real in the middle of all the ghosts I'd been walking through since we arrived. "You're actually here," she said, her voice half laughing, half breathless, like she didn't quite believe it herself. I let out a small breath when I didn't realize I'd been holding and returned the hug. "Yeah, I'm here." For a moment everything else fell away, the house, the memories, the strange tension lingering in the air. It was just Talia, exactly as she had always been. Loud, warm, impossible to ignore. Then just as quickly she pulled back, her energy shifting in that effortless way she had, already turning her attention elsewhere. "Mark." Her eyes lit up with curiosity as she stepped toward him, giving him a once-over before breaking into a grin. "Well," she said, clasping her hands together with a playful tilt of her head, "welcome home, you sojourners." Her tone carried that theatrical flair, like she had been waiting all day to say it. "How was your trip?" she continued, stepping a little closer, her voice bright and teasing. "You bring back anything interesting to show us locals?" There it was, that spark, that rhythm of conversation that made everything feel just a little less heavy. I glanced at Mark, a faint smile tugging at my lips as I shifted my suitcase upright. "Careful," I muttered under my breath, just loud enough for him to hear. "She's going to interrogate you." Talia shot me a quick look, catching it immediately. "Oh, I absolutely am," she said, pointing at me before turning right back to Mark. "You don't just disappear on some grand adventure and come back without stories. That's not how this works." She stepped back slightly, gesturing toward the open door behind her, the mansion now feeling less like a silent monument and more like something breathing again. "Well," she said, raising an eyebrow, a grin pulling at the corner of her mouth. "Are you two going to stand out here all day looking dramatic, or are you coming inside and telling me everything?" For the first time since we arrived, the tension in my chest eased. The house didn't feel quite so quiet anymore. Talia pulled us both inside before either of us could linger too long on the porch, as if she could sense hesitation and refuse to let it take root. The moment the door shut behind us, the sound changed, the outside world dropping away, replaced by the familiar hush of the Blum mansion's interior. The air inside was cooler, faintly scented with lemon polish and something sweet baking somewhere deeper in the house. She ushered us straight into the sitting room, talking the entire time, her voice filling every corner before we even had a chance to adjust. "Sit, sit, sit," she said, patting the couch with exaggerated urgency. "No, not there, that spot is warmer, I don't know why, it just is, trust me." We sat, and immediately I recognized it. The same couch, the same one from our first cruise send-off years ago when everything had still felt like it was beginning instead of circling back on itself. The cushions dipped slightly in the same places, like the house remembered every version of us that had ever sat there. I shifted a little, unsettled by how easily my body remembered where to settle. Talia, meanwhile, was already in motion again. Within minutes she had turned the sitting room into something halfway between a care package and a small feast. A tray appeared, then another. Plates stacked with little ham sandwiches, cucumber slices on rye, cheese cut into neat triangles, crackers arranged with unnecessary precision. A pitcher of lemonade sat at the center like a crown jewel, condensation already beating down its sides. "You both look like you've been surviving on bad decisions and ocean air," she said, pouring 2 glasses without asking. "So I hope you eat something." "I don't think ocean air counts as a food group," Mark said, watching her with cautious amusement. "It does when you're at sea long enough," she replied instantly. "Trust me, I've done the research." She leaned over and pressed a quick kiss to my cheek, then another, as if she was checking if I was real. Then she did the same to Mark, who blinked like he wasn't sure whether to laugh or surrender. "Eat," she commanded again, sliding plates toward us. "Drink. If you faint in my house, I will be extremely offended." I picked up a sandwich more out of instinct than hunger, but my attention drifted away almost immediately. Through the tall back windows, something in the yard caught my eye. Movement. At first it looked like quiet activity, gardeners maybe, but as I focused I realized it was more organized than that. People were setting up chairs in rows across the lawn. White fabric covers, floral arrangements are being carried carefully into place. Ladders leaned against hedges as strings of decorations were being adjusted. Flowers, too many flowers, were being assembled into arches and clusters. My stomach tightened slightly. That wasn't just maintenance, that was preparation. I slowly set my glass down. Tulua, I said carefully, eyes still on the yard. Are you throwing a party? The room changed instantly. The words seemed to land heavier than I intended. Tulua froze mid-pour and Mark stopped drinking his punch. A little bit of lemonade sloshed over the edge of her glass as she jolted, coughing once as if she'd swallowed the question instead of the drink. Tulua looked as though she had forgotten an important detail that had been right in front of her the entire time. Suddenly, she realized she had made a terrible mistake. How could she have been so insensitive? She had invited Noah back to the mansion while, just outside, construction workers and interior decorators were preparing everything for Tate and Clay's wedding send-off party. The decorations, the preparations, the constant reminders of the upcoming celebration, it was all happening around him. Tulua felt a wave of guilt wash over her. It felt as though, without realizing it, she was taking away from her own son's wedding while asking Noah to stand there and watch. Looking at Noah's face, she could see the pain she had overlooked. She had been so consumed with schedules, approving bills, finalizing arrangements, and making sure every detail of the wedding was perfect that she had forgotten the one detail that mattered most. She had forgotten what it would feel like for Noah to be surrounded by reminders of the person he had lost. She hadn't considered that bringing him back to the mansion at that moment might reopen every wound he had been trying to heal. She had been planning a celebration for Tate, but she had forgotten that Noah was someone who was hurting, too. Tulua had spent 22 years watching Tate and Noah be inseparable. They had always been a pair like salt and pepper, two things everyone naturally expected to find together. They had their arguments, their difficult moments, and their periods of distance, but somehow they always found their way back to each other. That was simply how life had always been. Until it wasn't. Tulua was still adjusting to the reality that Tate and Noah no longer lived together, no longer shared the same routines, and no longer existed as the constant presence in each other's lives that everyone had grown accustomed to. For so long, their closeness had felt permanent, almost impossible to imagine ending. She realized she had unconsciously continued thinking of them as a pair, even after they had separated. Tulua had forgotten that things had changed. She had forgotten that Noah wasn't just temporarily away from Tate, that their relationship, whatever it had been for 22 years, was no longer the same. And standing there, seeing Noah's reaction to everything happening around him, she finally understood that she wasn't the only one struggling to accept that they were no longer together. "Oh," she said quickly, too quickly, "no, well." Mark glanced between us. I didn't look away from her. There was a pause then, a long one, the kind that doesn't belong in someone like Tulua's presence. She set the pitcher down more carefully than anything she'd done so far and gave a tight, slightly forced smile. "I'm so sorry, honey," she said, her voice softening in a way that felt almost rehearsed. That was insensitive of me to invite you back here to celebrate your return while rubbing it in your face about my happiness and the nuptial events. I sh'd've had us meet somewhere else. A restaurant sh'd've been far less ambush-like." I blinked. Ambush-like. "Yes," she said firmly, nodding as if she'd settled on the word. "Because this is, well, it's not a party." My gaze shifted again to the yard. "Then what is it?" She hesitated. For the first time since we walked in, she looked like she wasn't entirely in control of the room anymore. Her fingers tapped lightly against the edge of the table. "They're assembling the wedding decorations," she said finally, carefully, as if each word needed to be placed just right. Silence dropped like something physical. I felt the glass in my hand slip before I even realized I'd let go. It hit the table with a dull clink, spilling a little lemonade across the surface, soaking into a napkin and bleeding outward as it had nowhere else to go. For a moment, I didn't move. Wedding decorations, the words didn't land immediately. They just hovered there, refusing to settle into meaning. Then they did. I hadn't just been away on a cruise, I hadn't just been coming home, I had come back into something already in motion. Tulua exhaled sharply, immediately reaching for a cloth to clean up the spill. "I sh'd've had the gardeners not work today," she said quickly. I truly stuv, it's just everything happened so fast and I didn't want you walking into it blind. Mark shifted beside me, his voice quieter now. Oh, Noah must have forgotten Tate's wedding is in 2 days, he's been so preoccupied with our cruise. Talia paused, and in that pause everything sharpened. The yard outside, the chairs, the flowers, the careful arrangement of a future that was already being built without us. She looked at me when she answered. Tate's. The name hit harder than anything else. My throat tightened. For a second I couldn't process anything beyond that. Tate's wedding. The room felt smaller all at once, like the walls had moved in while I wasn't paying attention. Talia stepped closer, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Talia sniffled as she tried to apologize, her voice filled with regret. I didn't mean for you to come home and walk into all of this, she said softly. I really didn't, Tate said the planning needed to begin immediately, and with you being gone for so long, I forgot. She paused, looking at Noah with tears in her eyes. I forgot that things between you and him aren't the same anymore. I forgot that you two aren't as close as you used to be. The realization seemed to hurt her as much as it hurt him. How foolish and insensitive of me, Talia whispered. I should have thought about how this would feel for you. I should have remembered that you aren't just someone who can walk back into this house and pretend nothing has changed. She reached for the right words, but they seemed impossible to find. I'm so sorry, dear, she said quietly. I never wanted to hurt you. I stared at the spilled lemonade spreading across the table again, watching it soak into the wood grain. Strange how something so small could feel like it was spreading through everything. Mark broke the silence first, and Chloe's happy. Talia nodded slowly. Yes, Chloe is very happy. That name landed differently but just as sharply. The house didn't feel like home anymore, not in the way it had 5 minutes ago. Now it felt like something I had stepped back into too late, like a conversation already halfway finished before I arrived. I finally looked up again, my voice quieter than I expected. I forgot. Talia's expression softened immediately. I know, she said, I know you probably did. But that didn't change anything. Outside, the garden kept moving, chairs being placed, flowers being arranged, a ceremony taking shape in a world I hadn't realized I was already absent from, and all I could think was that I hadn't just come home, I had come back to something I wasn't sure I was still part of. My hand came up to my face before I even realized it, fingers pressing hard against my forehead as I could physically hold the thoughts in place. Like I could stop them from forming. The wedding, the ceremony, Chloe, Tate, I didn't want any of it in my head, not the images, not the words, not the future being built somewhere I wasn't standing in anymore. I didn't even want to finish the thought properly. It felt as if I let it complete itself, something inside me would snap into place in a way I couldn't undo. The room stayed too bright, too normal. Talia's voice softened immediately. Noah, hey. It's a migraine, nothing too bad, I'm fine, I said too quickly, even though my voice didn't sound like it belonged to someone fine. Mark shifted slightly beside me, concern flickering across his face. You just dropped your drink, he said carefully, like he was trying not to spook me. You sure you're okay? I wasn't, that was the problem. Talia took a step closer, her earlier energy gone now, replaced with something quieter and uncertain. Honey, talk to us, she said gently. You don't have to just sit there like this. But I couldn't sit there, not in that room, not under that house, not with the windows showing a future I wasn't part of in the same way anymore. My breathing felt wrong, too shallow, too fast, like my body had stopped agreeing with me. Before either of them could move closer, I pushed myself up. I need the bathroom, I said, already turning away. Noah, Talia started, but I didn't stop. I walked fast, almost too fast, down the hallway, passing framed photos and polished walls that suddenly felt too close. The bathroom door was already open before I reached it. The moment I got inside, I barely made it to the sink before everything hit me at once. It wasn't dramatic in the way people imagine it. It was immediate, uncontrolled. My hands gripped the edge of the sink as I bent forward, breath breaking apart, and I couldn't stop it. I didn't want this, I didn't want any of it, but my body wasn't asking for permission. I vomited violently in Talia's guest bathroom toilet, my chest heaving, trying to settle my stomach to no avail. When the nausea finally passed, I stayed there for a second, staring at the basin like I didn't recognize myself in it. The silence in the bathroom felt heavier than the noise outside had been. I turned on the water, splashed my face, and wiped it with shaking hands. My reflection in the mirror looked wrong, too pale, too distant, like I had stepped out of myself for a moment and wasn't fully back yet. I flushed the toilet just to make noise, something normal, something final. Then I straightened up, breathing hard through my nose, forcing my body back into control piece by piece. When I opened the door, the house felt different, too still, too aware. I walked back into the sitting room and saw them before they saw me properly. Talia was standing now, one hand half raised like she had been about to follow me but didn't. Mark was still seated but forward in his posture, tension in his shoulders. The moment they saw my face, both of them froze. There was a look between them first, quick, wordless. Talia's eyes flicked to Mark. Mark's jaw tightened slightly as he looked back at her, like a silent exchange passed between them. "This is worse than we thought." Neither of them said it out loud, but it was there. Talia took a small step forward. "Noah." I didn't answer. I wasn't looking at either of them properly anymore. My mind was already elsewhere, pulling away from the couch, the lemonade, the carefully arranged life in that room. "I need my suitcase," I said flatly. Mark stood halfway. "Wait just." "I'm leaving," I cut in, voice sharper than I intended. That made Talia stop completely. Her expression shifted, confusion first, then concern, then something like guilt trying to catch up to the moment. "No, honey, you don't have to do that," she said quickly. "Just sit down for a second, please." But I was already walking. The silence behind me was immediate, no footsteps following. Just that heavy, stunned stillness of two people who didn't know which version of me they were talking to anymore. I moved through the hallway fast, opening doors, scanning rooms, not even fully seeing them. My suitcase had to be somewhere. I just needed it. I just needed out. Behind me, I heard Talia speak again, quieter now. "Mark," she said under her breath, "go after him." Mark didn't respond right away. Then more reluctantly, "What do I even say?" "I don't know," she whispered back. "Something, anything, he can't just." Her voice cut off as I reached the front entry again. The door was right there, open, bright, real. I grabbed my suitcase from where it had been set near the entry table, yanked it up without bothering to check anything, and turned back just once. Talia was standing in the doorway to the hall now, her hand hovering near her mouth. Mark stood a step behind her, watching me with a quiet, conflicted expression, like he wanted to stop me but didn't know how without breaking something worse. There was a long pause. No one spoke. It felt like all three of us were waiting for a version of this moment that didn't exist. Then I exhaled. "Sorry," I said, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for anymore. And I walked out, the door shut behind me, but not loudly, not dramatically, just final. The driveway stretched out ahead under the afternoon light, too bright and too open. I rolled my suitcase down it, each wheel clicking against the stone in a steady rhythm that was easier to focus on than anything behind me. The house didn't follow, but I could feel it anyway. Halfway down the driveway, I stopped and looked toward the street. No taxi yet, just heat, silence, and space I didn't know what to do with. Behind me, inside the mansion, I imagined them still standing there. Talia stared at the door as she tried to undo it. Mark is still trying to understand what just happened without having the words for it yet. And I kept walking anyway, one slow step closer to the curb, waiting for a ride that felt like it was the only thing still moving forward when I couldn't. Mark came out of the house first, the door swinging open behind him harder than necessary, like even the house was reacting to what was happening. He moved quickly down the steps, eyes locked on me as I stood at the edge of the driveway, one hand clenched around my suitcase handle like it was the only stable thing left in my world. Talia followed right behind him a second later, slower but still urgent in that way she had when she was trying to fix something before it fully broke. Her presence hit the air behind me before her voice did. I stood there on the edge of the driveway, heat pressing down from above, the mansion behind me feeling too large, too full, too aware of everything that had just happened inside it. My stomach twisted again, sharp and unpleasant. I swallowed hard, breathing through my nose, trying to keep myself upright. "I really shouldn't have had those pastries this morning," I muttered under my breath, mostly to myself, staring down at the stone under my feet as it could anchor me. Mark slowed as he reached me, Hey, just breathe, he said carefully, hands slightly raised like he didn't want to startle me. You don't have to leave like this, just stand still for a second. I am standing still, I said, but it came out strained, tight around the edges. Talia reached me next. She didn't hesitate. She came up behind me and wrapped her arms around me from the back, her cheek briefly brushing my shoulder as she held me like she could physically steady whatever was shaking inside me. Honey, it's all right, she said softly, stroking my neck in slow, calming motions. It's all right, I shouldn't have sprung all of this on you like this. It was really thoughtless of me to ask you to come to the house while everything is going on in the backyard like that. Her voice wavered slightly at the edges, not dramatic, just honest in a way she usually avoided. I've been so busy, she continued, quieter now. I'm under so much stress with all of this planning and I didn't think about what it would feel like for you walking into it like that. I was thoughtless, I'm sorry. Her arms tightened slightly like she was afraid I might disappear if she let go. Mark watched both of us for a moment, jaw tight, his expression shifting between concern and frustration not at me but at the situation itself. He ran a hand through his hair once, exhaling sharply. I already knew before she started what Talia was asking. My stomach dropped again, worse this time. Are you coming to the ceremony? The words hit the air between all three of us and stayed there. Mark's head snapped slightly toward her. Talia, he said immediately, sharp but controlled, seriously now. But she didn't back down. She just looked at me, waiting, like she needed the answer more than she needed the timing to be perfect. I felt something inside me buckle, not loudly, not dramatically, just final. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on my suitcase handle so much my fingers ached. No, I said quickly without explaining why to anyone there. My voice came out low but steady. No, I repeated clearer this time like I needed even myself to hear it properly. I'm not coming. Silence followed immediately, even the wind seemed to hesitate. Talia's arms loosened completely but she didn't let go right away, like her body had to catch up with what she'd just heard. Mark's expression changed first, small, controlled, but unmistakably stunned. His eyes searched my face like he was trying to find a version of me that might take it back. Talia blinked slowly. Noah, she said carefully like she hadn't fully processed the answer yet. Are you sure you don't just need time? You don't have to decide right this second. I already did, I cut in. My voice was quieter now but firmer in a way that didn't invite argument. That made her stop completely. Mark stepped closer, his tone gentler but urgent. Hey, he said, you don't have to make a permanent decision off a moment like this. You just got back, you're overwhelmed, everything's hitting you at once. I'm not overwhelmed, I said, sharper than before, then exhaled and forced myself to steady. I'm clear. That landed harder. Talia finally let go of me fully, stepping around so she could see my face. Her expression had shifted again, hurt now, but mixed with something like realization she didn't want to name. You're saying that like it's simple, she said softly. It is, I replied. But it wasn't, and all three of us knew it. Mark rubbed the back of his neck, looking away briefly like he was trying to figure out how to step into a conversation that was already too far gone. This isn't about just a ceremony, he said quietly. This is bigger than that, you know that. I let out a slow breath through my nose. I know exactly what it is, I said. Talia's eyes searched mine again, slower now. Then why? When I met you for lunch, Talia, at the restaurant, when we exchanged the adoption papers, I explained that my attendance at Blue family functions wasn't anywhere I wanted to be. I don't owe this family anything. I'm not a part of this family and you know who's responsible for that fact. I can't sit there, I interrupted, voice tightening again but still controlled. I can't sit there and pretend I'm part of something I'm not part of anymore. That silence afterward was different, heavier. Noah shook his head, anger and hurt fighting for control of his voice. I'm not going to a wedding to celebrate the marriage of a man who sabotaged my adoption into this family. He stopped and took a few deep breaths, trying to steady himself, but the years of resentment he had carried came rushing forward. Talia flinched. Mark's mouth fell open slightly in shock. That's right, Noah continued, looking between them. His parents were going to adopt me, Tate and his family were going to make me part of this family. The room became painfully quiet. Tate stopped it. He prevented it from happening over and over again. He lied and told Talia he had given me the paperwork. He made excuses. I don't even remember if it was before we went to Brown or during my sophomore year anymore because it doesn't matter. What matters is that he took something away from me that I can never get back. Noah's voice cracked, but he continued. I'm not going to celebrate a man who took away one of the most important things anyone can have, a family. He looked at Talia with tears in his eyes. He didn't want me to be his brother, that was the truth, but instead of having the courage to tell you and me that to our faces, he lied. He deceived everyone, he hid it. Noah swallowed hard. It's been 8 years since I became an adult, and for 8 years he kept this from me. He made sure I stayed an orphan. He made sure I had no family of my own, especially after my mother died 6 years ago. His anger turned into heartbreak. He even used my eating disorder as an excuse to keep me away from this family. He took something I struggled with and turned it into a reason why I didn't belong. Noah shook his head. So no, I don't want to celebrate him. I don't want to stand there and pretend everything is fine. I don't want to congratulate someone who spent years making sure I didn't have the one thing I wanted most. He looked away, his voice quieter now. And if Chloe makes him miserable someday, not that I would wish unhappiness on anyone, then maybe he'll finally understand what it's like to lose something because of someone else's choices. Maybe that will be his karma for the way he treated people, including me. Noah wiped his face. So no, I don't want to attend anything he has to celebrate. Mark's expression softened in a way that looked like understanding, even if he didn't like it. Talia, though, looked like she wanted to argue, but couldn't find a way to do it without breaking something worse. For a moment, none of us moved. The house behind us stood still. The yard still held the shape of a wedding being built just out of sight. And I stayed where I was at the edge of the driveway, suitcase still in hand, feeling like I was no longer standing at home, but at the end of something I didn't get to choose the timing of. Talia's voice followed me down the driveway even as I kept walking, suitcase rolling behind me in sharp, uneven clicks against the stone. Noah, she called again, softer this time, like she was trying to catch me before I hardened completely. I know why you won't come to the wedding. That made me stop for half a second. Don't turn around, just pause. Mark glanced between us, already sensing where this was going, his jaw tightening slightly. Talia stepped forward a little, careful now, her tone shifting into something more deliberate, more personal. Couldn't you find it in your heart to come anyway? She asked. For me, for your friends, they're all going to be there. It would just be weird if you weren't. I exhaled sharply through my nose, still not turning around. Weird. That word landed wrong, not cruel, not dramatic, just wrong in how casually it tried to make my absence sound like a social inconvenience instead of what it actually was. Talia kept going anyway, her voice tightening with emotion she was trying to manage. I understand why you don't want to be there, I really do, but couldn't you do it for me, Noah? Talia's lip trembled. That finally made me turn slightly, just enough for her to see my face. Mark shifted his weight, uneasy now. Talia, he warned quietly as he could already feel this slipping. But she didn't stop. Her eyes were fixed on me. Just show up, she said. Just for a little while, you don't even have to stay long. I don't want it to feel like something is missing. That did it. Something in my expression tightened, not loud, not explosive, just final. I let out a short, humorless breath. There will be other parties and events that aren't centered on your family's progress. If you or my friends have birthdays or anniversaries, I'll go, but not to blah events. I just don't want to be there, I said. My voice was steady, but flat in a way that made it worse. Noah, Talia started again, softer now, almost pleading. I shook my head once, cutting her off before she could build it back up. No, I said again, I don't want to be there, and I want everyone to respect that. Stop pushing and leave it alone. My tone told Mark or Talia to drop the topic or I'd explode. Mark's eyes flicked to me at that, more concerned now than anything else. I tightened my grip on my suitcase handle. Respect my decision, I added, voice firmer. I don't want to hear anything more about it. That silence afterward wasn't empty, it was heavy. Talia looked like she wanted to argue again, but something in my tone finally made her stop. Her arms dropped slightly at her sides like she didn't know what to do with them anymore. Mark exhaled slowly, looking away toward the street as if trying to give the moment space it didn't want. And then the taxi pulled up. The timing was almost too perfect. The car rolled to a stop at the curb, engine humming low. I didn't hesitate, I just walked forward, opened the door, and climbed in before anyone could find another sentence to add. From inside the car, I could see them through the window. Talia stood frozen on the driveway, expression caught somewhere between frustration and hurt, like she was replaying every word she'd said and trying to find where it went wrong. Mark stood slightly behind her, rubbing his jaw, staring at the ground for a second before glancing at her again. The driver asked where to. My house, I said immediately. No hesitation, no softness. Behind me I heard Talia finally speak again, her voice muffled by glass. This did not go well, she said quietly, almost to herself. Mark answered after a beat, voice low. Yeah, you really work yourself into corners sometimes. She shot him a look. I'm right here, Talia said. I know, Mark replied, that's kind of the problem. There was a pause. Then Talia let out a small, frustrated breath, running a hand through her hair. I didn't mean for Noah to feel like that, she said, more to herself now. I just wanted him to... To what? Mark asked gently but firmly. To sit in something he clearly can't sit in right now. That made her go quiet. The taxi shifted into gear. The car started rolling forward. Through the window I saw Talia take a step forward like she might follow, then stop herself. Mark stayed where he was, watching the car leave, his expression unreadable. Inside the car, the silence felt different, not calm, just removed. Behind us I could faintly hear Mark speaking again as the mansion got smaller. I'll wait an hour or two, he said, then I'll go to his house. Talia responded quieter, and then what? A pause. Then Mark, almost resigned, then we figure out how badly we just made everything. Talia didn't answer that. The house disappeared behind us as the taxi turned onto the main road. And for the first time since setting foot back in Los Angeles, I didn't feel like I was going somewhere, just away from everything I couldn't stay in. Talia kept pushing for Mark to return to Noah's home and convince her surrogate son to attend the wedding. As if he pressed the right angle in the conversation, I'd suddenly changed my mind. I understood where she was coming from, but it didn't make it easier. I didn't want to go, I couldn't go. And I didn't want to sit there explaining every reason, every feeling, every memory that made it impossible. People always wanted explanations, like they were simple things, like I could line them up neatly and make them make sense. But this wasn't something I could translate into words that would satisfy anyone. I just needed space. I just needed them to stop asking. By the time I got out of the car, my house still didn't feel like it belonged to me. It was mine on paper, mine in every legal sense, mine because I had signed my name and watched the numbers move and shift and settle into something permanent. But standing in front of it, keys in hand, it still felt like I was visiting someone else's life. The air around it was too still, like it hadn't learned my habits yet. No sound of anyone calling my name from inside. No rhythm of footsteps that matched mine, just a quiet that didn't ask anything of me, which somehow made it worse. I opened the door and stepped inside anyway. The floors were clean, the rooms half empty in that intentional way that says you're supposed to build something here. The movers had removed everything from the house that reminded me of Tate, but I didn't feel like building anything. I stood there for a long time without moving, as if I stayed still enough, the situation would rearrange itself into something simpler, something that made sense to be in. The cruise still lingered in my mind in fragments. The endless water, the forced smiles, the moments where I thought distance would help me reset. Instead I came back to this house, this pressure, this expectation that I would reappear into my life as if nothing had shifted inside me. Joey's money had made the purchase possible, but it didn't make any of this easier. If anything, it made it feel more complicated, like I had accepted something I couldn't fully undo. I barely made it 5 minutes before the phone started. The first call came from Suzza with no hesitation, like the person on the other end had been waiting for me to land. I didn't answer it. Then another came from Talia, and another. The screen kept lighting up with names I knew too well, friends who sounded like they were trying to reach me through a wall I hadn't agreed to build. I let it ring at first, thinking it would slow down if I gave it space. But it didn't. It multiplied. Messages started stacking up behind the calls, each one carrying the same tone wrapped in different words. Please just come. We need you there. It won't be the same without you in the photos. Everyone's asking about you. You can't miss this. Each message pulled at something inside me, not because I didn't understand them, but because I did. They were excited, they were sentimental, they were trying to hold on to a moment and include everyone they loved in it. From their side of things, it made perfect sense. From where I stood, it felt like something else entirely, like I was being asked to step into a role I didn't recognize anymore, just so the picture of the day could feel complete. What they didn't seem to understand was that I wasn't refusing because I didn't care. It was the opposite problem. Caring didn't make it easier, it made it heavier, because weddings aren't just events, they're declarations. They're public proof that something has settled into place between two people, that a future has been chosen and announced in front of everyone who ever mattered. And when you're standing on the outside of that kind of certainty, it does something to you that's hard to explain without sounding bitter or dramatic. It isn't jealousy exactly, it's anger. It's like standing in a room where everyone else knows the script and you're the only one who missed the rehearsal. You smile at the right times, you show up when you're supposed to, but there's always a moment where you realize you're not actually inside the thing everyone else is celebrating. That's what made the calls so difficult, because they weren't wrong to want me there, I knew that. I could imagine the photos, the laughter, the group moments where someone would inevitably say, "Wait, where is he?" And someone else would answer, "He couldn't make it." And the picture would still go on without me, still be beautiful, still be complete enough for everyone else. But I would be the part that didn't fit. And that was the part they didn't understand, how being missed doesn't always feel like love. Sometimes it just feels like pressure wearing a friendly face. I set the phone down on the counter and stared at it as it kept lighting up, vibrating softly against the wood like it was trying to crawl its way back into my hand. I didn't turn it off. I didn't block anyone. I just let it exist there, buzzing in the silence of a house that still didn't know me well enough to interrupt. Outside, the light shifted slightly through the windows, changing the shape of the room without asking permission. I thought about how easy it would be to say yes, to show up, to stand in the background of someone else's memory and pretend it didn't matter what I was carrying inside. But I also knew myself well enough to know that pretending had a limit. And right now, I was already past it. I wouldn't go to the wedding. That decision wasn't new. It had already settled inside me long before the calls started, long before people tried to convince me that showing up would mean something meaningful, long before I had to sit in the quiet of my own space and feel the pressure of being expected somewhere I didn't belong anymore. It wasn't about logistics or timing. Tate had abandoned me and left my house to play house with a generic girl he dated.